So in the previous session I kind of did the presentation, and I think some of you were here for that. I can talk about anything you want to talk about in this session. So is there anything in particular that you would like to see, discuss, go over? If you don't, I'm going to sing a song.
I feel a bit embarrassed because I'm completely new to Fire.
That's fine.
So my main question is where to start.
Where to start?
I'm sorry I missed your previous presentation, but there were parallels, so pick up something in the questionnaire, maybe.
Questionnaire, I won't be going over questionnaire. If you're interested in that one in particular, Brian Postlethwaite is giving a talk on that. That's the questionnaire resource itself. But I'm going to show you a few bits and pieces. So, okay, so the sort of topic, anybody else got anything? Otherwise you're going to have to put up with whatever I come up with. I was only joking about the singing.
That's a shame.
No. This is a good thing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is say, the Clinfire is actually hopefully going to be a useful sort of tool for you, because what it's about is helping you understand how Fire actually works. So I'm going to show you just a couple of the tools that are in there. And I'm going to show you the scenario builder to start out with. And the scenario builder is used to basically link resources together to figure out how you tell a clinical story. So you go into it, I should have perhaps said that clinfire.com is the place that you where you start from. It's freely available online. Over here, you set your Fire service. If you go into it for the first time, you will find that it defaults to the public happy 3 server, which is what I'm going to set it to. So that's what you'll come up with. If you want to build a scenario, go to the scenario builder here. And then here is where you choose, you basically choose the resources that you want to meet. So the best view is this graph view. And the graph view lets you add new resources and link them together. So in this particular case, I've got a patient resource here. And you'll see that when you select a resource in the graph view or anywhere else, you get a list of the properties of that element. Bob knows all this stuff. I should get you up here, Bob, doing that. And then we have an encounter, and then we have a condition like so. So if I, for example, wanted to represent a problem list, I might go to add a resource, and I might want to say I want a list resource like so, and I'll say it's a problem list. And I'll add that. And I now get a problem list, and there's a list resource there like so, and you see it's automatically linked up to the patient. But what I can then do is I can say, well, in my problem list, I also wanted to connect to the condition, because that's the whole point. So what I now want to do is I want to start adding structured data to the resources which are in the graph. And to do that, you select the particular element you want to add. So, for example, I want to create a link or a reference from my list to my condition. So I do that by going to the entry element there. I select the item link. What the tool will then do is then come up with all the potential things that can be a target for that reference. And in this particular case, the one I want is a condition resource, so I click on the plus button there like so, and it then establishes that link. So that's now the link that I have created from there to there. Incidentally, sorry if you guys are coming new, is there anything particular you want to talk about or see? Because I'm kind of winging this. So sing out if there's something that you actually want.
Is there any way, for instance, when you have profiles built in Forge,
yeah,
and we post them, for instance, local server, is there any way to import them in Scenario Builder or have them?
You can.
That's one of the things I would really like to learn.
So the support's a bit limited for that at the moment, but it works in exactly the same way. All you do is you select the profile tab there, and then you click on the Find Profile, select the base resource that you want. I'll stick with condition. And what it will now do is it will select, there we go, also those are all the profiles for which have been made on condition. Select that tab there. There's the Care Connect profile there. There's the extension that's been added to it, select it. Think about it. Oh, there it is. I've got this in there. So that's a CC condition. Edit. Okay, and there it is. Actually, hold on, I've got a funny feeling. I just want to do that again, so I'll just remove that out. Add resource, one profile, one condition, search for the profile, the results, add it to the list. I've got a funny feeling there's a bug. That's supposed to add it to the list, and it is not at the moment. So I'm not going to try and fix that in front of everybody here. But in theory, that should have worked. But be aware that the support for profiles is a bit limited right at the moment. If you are using it, then use the fire chat to communicate with me with errors that you've got, and we'll fix them as we actually go.
Yeah, we'll try to work on it, because right now I am a business analyst, so we use these kind of graphs to communicate with our hospital clients to show them what the structure of the definition is, and we draw them by hand.
If you are dealing with clinicians and other people, I would suggest that you might want to start using the logical models rather than the profiles. And the reason why I say that is that it often makes a lot more sense to a clinician to sort of see something like that. This particular case is an EDS, but there's lots of different ones. There's an adverse drug reaction that we're working on, for example. So they will understand more what those terms mean. As soon as you start throwing a lot of the fire-specific terms to clinical people, we can start getting rid of cognitive dissonance. So if you want to do stuff, I'd recommend to take a look at that. I'll go back to my scenario builder if I may, because what I kind of wanted to show you is we talked about structured data in the previous talk. So at the moment, if we go look at my actual resource, and I can see those links here, this is the actual data that I've entered. I've got the text that I typed in, and I've got the subject, and I've got pretty much not much more. If I want to start adding more data, so for example, suppose I want to add a particular code for this condition. I click on the code element like so, and what I now get is I get a description over here of what that element actually is. And it's specific to each one that you select. So there's the severity, for example, the subjective assessment of the severity of the condition. Here's the category, there's a verification status. So reading this off the extension definitions from the spec, directly from the spec. It tells you a bit about the thing. So if you look at verification status, we see that it's a data type code. It's bound to that value set. I can click on that link there to see what the actual values are if I want. If I want to actually add a value to this particular instance, I click on the data type like so. I will get a modal which will change according to the kind of data that I want. I'm going to say that it's provisional. And that now gets added to my resource. And if we go looking at it, we see that I now have verification status has now been added to my resource. I'm going to go back to here. If you're adding data to a particular resource, this kind of input mode here is quite a good one to use because it shows you all three on the one screen. You can see the graph or the references between the resources over here. Here is, if you like, the edit area where you can add stuff. And over here is the resource that we are creating in JSON format. If I go to a more complex one, like the code, so this is the condition code, and we can see that it's of a codable concept data type. That little icon there would take me to view the actual data type in the spec if I wanted to. That link there lets me look at the actual value set itself, so I can see that's the value set that's been defined for that. But if I want to actually add values, I go to the codable concept, and I can do an autocorrect. So if I type in ASTH, what happens now is behind the scenes, it actually invokes a terminology operation. And this is a really good example of using the operations defined in FHIR to actually do useful stuff. So in this particular case, it's gone to that value set, and it's invoked the expand operation in this particular case. The terminology server then performs the operation and returns the result back. and I just select them from here. So I need to say asthma, save, and I now have asthma added into my resource. So that's how you add structured data to a resource. Well,
so the value set binding here is an example. If you want to use a different one from the example, some are required, some are examples, and you can like define your own global concept.
So what you'd have to do is that's a new profile. So you'd create a profile on condition, and in that profile you would bind it to a different value set, and then you would look at that profile.
All right, and I can create a profile in here with ClinFire, or do I use Forge for that?
No, you can do that to some extent. That's what I'm kind of going to, I'll kind of go through that now. It's always a bit risky running this stuff in real time, so, but we'll give it a go anyway. So let's do that straight away. So we can create a, go back into ClinFire here. I'm going to close some of this other stuff down. So we'll go into the Value Set Explorer. Okay, so here's where you can create a simple value set. You can search for existing value sets like so. So again, it's looking at the actual terminology server to see if there's a contract condition cause codes here, for example, and we can see what's actually in them. It's executing that. The network is not always fast here. Okay, that's not going to work for me. Let's create a new value set. I'll just restart that. A new value set. I'll give it a name, since you asked for it. Tests. Check to make sure the name doesn't exist already on the server. Okay, so now I have a new value set called Bob M. And just to keep it simple, I'm going to use my asthma stuff. So I'll type in ASTM, goes away. So this is, I think, the network running really slowly. Either that or something's gone horribly wrong. I'm hoping that it's the network. Okay, that's not something's gone horribly wrong. I'm not able to talk to the network. In theory, you should be able to create a value. I'll just try something. So that's going to the happy server. And by the way, what I'm doing now is I'm just seeing if the servers are responding, and they are not. You click on that little question mark, okay, I'm getting an X, so the server's down. What I'll do, this may or may not work, but we'll give it a go, is I've got it on my local machine, so I'll flip across to using my local server. And that's the part of the problem with tools like ClinFire, of course, is they depend on these other services. If those servers go down, then so I'm just going to change that to use a local server, like so. Set them all the same, and I'll go back into my Value Set Explorer. Okay, and I'll create a new value set, which I'll call Bob M again. Okay, save it. Excellent, so we're now working. So I'm going to say I'm going to create a value set of asthmas. If you, it's against Snowbed, this one only works against Snowbed. If you add it directly as add, then you've got a value set with one code in it. If you use the add as branch, it'll create an as is filter. So I do that, so I now have a value set which has just got anything which is a Snowbed. I save that, okay, so I've now saved my value set. And I can see what's actually in there. If I click on that expansion tab there like so, and click on something like AST, click on the expand button there, I now get the list that I'd expect to see. Or I could type in, I'm not sure whether this is going to work, we'll give it a go. No, when you're doing an expansion, you're calling the expand operation, and it depends on the capabilities of the server behind it. And in this particular case, the search is always starting with type search. But anyway, so I've created my new value set. What I'm now going to do is I'm now going to go into the logical modeler. I'm going to create a new model. And I'm going to call my model bobbin as well, just because that's how I can remember it. Type it correctly, check to make sure that exists. All right. I'm going to set it on a single resource. So I'm going to create a profile on condition, which is going to link to that new set. So I find condition in my list. So I'll leave that copy elements checked. Click on save. Okay. So I've now created a logical model. The logical model is called BobM, and it's a duplicate of what a condition model looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my code, and I'm going to edit that element. And at the moment, it's linked to this condition code. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to select the value set from the server. BobM. There we are there. So there's the value set that we just created. I'll make the binding set example, the strength. This was, for those who weren't previous before, the binding strength was one of the critical things that you had when you're associating a value set to a thing, because it effectively says, can you get something that isn't in this value set? Most of the time, you can use required. That means it's got to come from this value set. We kind of recommend against that unless you've got a really good reason for doing so. So I'll go with example. I'll click on select, and then I'll save that. And then I'll save my model. Okay, so I now have a logical model called BobM with a different binding. I'm going to get rid of that element as well. Stage, because I'm sorry, I'm going to remove stage, and I'm going to remove that. Save the model. So what I can do at this point actually is I don't even have to go through a profile. So what I can do is I'll just close that guy down there, is I'll go into my scenario builder, like so, and I'll create a new scenario. Slightly unsurprising what the name is. There it is there. So there's nothing in it at the moment. I'm going to add a new resource. And this time I'm going to select logical model. So what that will do is that will now give me a list of all the logical models on the conformance server that I've created, and one of which is called BobM. So I select BobM, add, and so there you are right there. And notice how the elements that I removed in my logical model are no longer shown because they are part of this model. So if I now go to code, you can now see that it's now bound to that new BobM. And I can go into that, I can look at it in the binding. This is now looking, I can look at the value set. There's the value set looking at there. I can expand it, and you can see I'm only getting my asterisks. And so I close that. I'll go into my data type, ST, and there we go. So that's how you do it. So you can, if you want to, so that's doing it with the logical model. And personally, I think for the sorts of things at this design phase, I don't know that we need to go any further than this. You can if you want to, and I'll show you in just a second, but it works just as well. What you can do, for example, suppose if I'm going to go back to my logical modeler here. There's my BobM. And I'm going to add an element, and I'm going to call it moon phase. Phase of the moon when it's at its worst. Like so. I'm going to indicate in here that it's actually a extension, and I'm going to save that. So what I've done now is I've updated that logical model, and I'll save the logical model like so. If I go back into the launcher, go back to my scenario builder, go to my BobM, add a new resource. Maybe I'll get rid of, actually hold on before I do that. I kind of like the graph view because that's prettier than the others. I'll get rid of that one. And I'll add a new resource, logical model. It's BobM there, add. So I now have moon phase as a string.
Actually, the previous one had moon phase in there too. So it looked like it updated automatically.
It might have. I tend to, if I'm, it caches things for performance,
Okay.
so I tend to reload pages quite aggressively if I'm doing new stuff. Yeah.
I can some of them in profiles too. Like, why? What's the difference between like?
Okay, so the profile is the official Fire resource. You have to have a profile. So if I wanted to save this on a Fire server, this will fail because it's not in the structure that the Fire server expects. I've got to turn this into a profile in order to do so. The profile is the official representation. A logical model is where you just build something of whatever you want it to be using the Fire type infrastructure, using the structure definition, using the data types and so on and so forth. But it's not an official resource. So the structure inside it is different to what the Fire server expects. So it's a step on the way to developing a real profile. Does that make sense?
Like if I want to publish officially, I have to convert it to profile.
It's got to be a profile. And the way we can do that here, if we want to, so I'll close that down. So I've demonstrated that works. Can't tell you how delighted I am that this is actually working at the moment. Man, the gods are smiling. If I go back to my logical model here, there's I'm actually going to take moon phase. Well, no, I'll show you how it actually works. So at the moment, this is if I want to try and generate a profile, I've got my logical model there, and I click the generate profile button like so, and there we go. I knew that was going to happen, by the way, so don't think I made a mistake. So what's happened there is it's tried to generate a profile from my model, an official profile, it'll work, but I haven't told it what the extension definition is. And if you remember in my previous talk, I said that every extension has to have a link to its URL. So what I've got to do is I've got to go into my, go to my moon phase element that I created. I've got to edit it, and I've already said it was an extension, but what I've got to do is I've got to find the extension definition and link it to it. So I do that by clicking on the Find button, and I now get all of the extensions that can be used against condition on my server, and I'll select the one that I wanted. But let's say it's not there, which it sort of isn't at the moment. So I now need to create an extension definition. Okay? So just to rephrase, what we're doing here is we created a logical model, and we use the logical model to deal with our clinicians or our I think that some of the people in the HSM working group meetings are now using this to test things out. And we've decided that yes, we're on a moon phase. But I now want to save this on a Fire server. I can't save a logical model on a Fire server. It's got to be a profile. So I now have to create a profile. But the profile needs an extension definition. So I'm now creating the extension definition. Hope I'm not confusing things too much there. But anyway, what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll create an extension definition. Okay, it's going to be a new extension definition. I'm going to call it moon phase. And it's going to be the phase of the moon when cruised. I click on the check button and that gives it a URL. So this is that canonical URL I was talking about. This is the thing that links the actual value in an instance to the definition, which is that guy right there. And I then need to say where I can use it, add a context. So I'm going to use it in conditions, like so. And then I now add an element, which I will say is going to be a string. I'll add that. And that's pretty much all I need to do. So what I've done is I've said I'm creating a new element, it's an extension definition, it's going to be of type string, it's optional, and I apply it to condition. So if I save that, the extension's now been saved. So I now have I didn't set the publisher, which was a little bit naughty, but if I go into name and search it, I should be able to find moon phase there. and I'll just set the, you can see there's my definition now, the URL, that's the name of it, description where to find data type, all that sort of stuff. I can edit it from here if I want to. So if I say that Orion is the publisher, for example, and save that. Okay, so now set. Alright, so I've now created my extension definition. So I go back into my logical modeler, and to edit the element, I now have moon faces in there. So now that I've created my extension definition, I can now link it back into my profile. So if I select that guy there like so, and you can see there's the definition coming up through there, click on save. Now I can go in and generate a profile, and now it's accepting it. So I now have a profile, I'll save that, and save is successful. So I now have a profile called Bob MCF profile that I have created. So it's a real profile against my model. So now, if I go back into my scenario builder, and go to Bob M, add a resource. This time I want a profile. I'm going to find the profile. It's going to be profile on condition. Like so. Do a search, it's found 3 of them. There's the one that I've created. Here's the extension down there that I've added, moon phase. Select and edit. Just adding some text to it there. Like so. Okay, and so I now have my extension. So and it's in purple to tell you that it's an extension, but I can just add this data type of string. So I can say full moon. Like so. But now I've got a real extension. So now it's now an extension element. So this could be saved onto a file server.
So right now it's living where? On the conformance server, or?
So the artifacts that I've created were a profile on condition. No, I'll start with the extension definition, which is on the conformance server. And then the profile was also on the conformance server, because those are all conformance type profiles. That's where they sit. The scenario that I'm creating is on my local machine, because the scenario is just a local thingy. If I was to create an instance of that, and I probably, if I'm going to do that, let's give it a crack. I think I probably need to add a patient to my sticking with the Bob thing here, I hope that's all right. And I'm going to go and add a name too, because I'm going to need that. But I won't Bob the builder like so. Notice, by the way, that it hasn't automatically created the link between the two, because it only does that at create time. But if I take my condition there, I can go to my subject, and I can link it to my patient like so. So there you go. So I've now got my condition, and if you recall, my condition has actually got an extension on it. There's my patient. What I should now be able to do from here is to save that on the server. So I now click update server, testing like so. Okay, and that's now saved it on the server. To prove it, which is always risky, but I'll do it anyway, just for fun, because I'm feeling confident and brave. So there is the actual condition itself. This is the condition resource. So I'm expecting to find on the data server, because data was saved to the data server, a condition that has this ID, because this ID was created by the scenario builder. So what I'm going to do is, I can't do it. I'll look at the JSON view. I'll just copy that out there. So I got it. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to go back into ClinFire. This time I'm going to use the server query, because this lets me make a query directly against the server. And so I just need to remind myself where I'm putting things. Everything's local, all right? So if I go onto my local server, which is there, and I'm going to do a query, I'm going to look for a condition. There. I'm going to look for a condition where the ID is equal to that. And if I click the execute button, it'll find it. I'm really not quite sure if I'm going to click the execute button just yet, but what the heck, all right. Just look at that, look at that. Round of applause, please, round of applause. And there it is right there, and there it is with the extension there on it as well. So that's the difference. If I tried to do that with a profile, with a logical model, it wouldn't let me in.
So is the data server local or is it a public app you want?
The way to tell is here and it's local.
It's all local.
Yeah, it's simply because the public ones didn't seem to be responding.
Now this is a naive question. So I'm used to having the server create your ID for you.
Yes.
But you're having ClaimFire impose an ID.
Yeah. Why am I doing that? Laziness. Simply that if I create, so the wider question here is that a fire allows a client to establish an ID or the server. Generally the server does it. It's the safer way to do it. So you create a resource and you save it against the server gives it an ID and you've got the ID back. But that actually requires a bit more work from a client's perspective. I've got to save it and then I've got to come back and look at what. And what this is all about, the scenario builder is all about, is creating these graphs, these references between things. So if I was to let the server do it, then for every resource I created, I'd have to save it, and then I'd have to get the ID, and then I'd have to use that. It's just far too much work, and I'm just too lazy. So I'm doing it client side.
So when you're creating a server, it's going to say, does this thing already exist?
What will actually happen is, it is exactly so. If there happens to be a resource with this ID on the server will overwrite it, will replace it with my one. And that's the risk. But I've made up something with CF minus in front of it, and I've got a pseudo-random data generated thing, and it's test data, so I don't really care. In real life, you probably would not do this. If you were doing this in a real world scenario, you would almost certainly have the server define the IDs.
We created a profile with an extension.
Yeah.
In real life, many people might need similar extensions. So
Yeah.
like they might create different extensions, but it might be mapped together. Is there any decision support tool, knowledge discovery to look all this?
Yep, there is. It's an excellent question, and it's one that's going to become front and centre moving forwards, this point forwards. That's really where Simplify sits. So, I don't know if you remember, how's this one? Basically what should happen is that rather than just launching in and creating your own extension, again in real life, you should actually go and see if somebody else has created an extension that meets your needs. The way to do that is, the first place to go looking is if you go into your spec, Fire R3 there, go to any, I usually go to this thing just for no good reason, go either way. Let's go to patient, which I know has got some. By the way, are you familiar with what these numbers mean? And let me go back to that spec. These numbers.
Maturity level?
Sorry?
Maturity level?
Dan, you already knew that kind of stuff. I'm going to become redundant fairly quickly. So if you go into the profiles and extensions here, here's where you can see the official extensions that exist for profile. So you should go and look there first. The second place to go and look is in the registry, the fire registry, which is an implementation of Simplifier, to see if it exists there. If it doesn't exist there, then it's reasonable to go and create it yourself. But this all comes under governance, and it's something that's being worked through, and it tends to be slightly jurisdictional. In the UK, for example, the Care Connect, in conjunction with the NHS, are basically building their profiles and building their extension definitions as well under the governance process of Care Connect interopen/NHS. 5 minutes, okay. Yep.
I sort of have an issue with, I'm quite new to fire, but I've been working with scenarios for a long time, and I have a problem with your definition of scenario, which is not sort of the standard informatics definition of scenario, where you actually define a scenario, sort of the source, reference sources, how are you sort of modeling your semantics for that scenario, And then you want to define the roles, the context and backgrounds. Then you want the primary goal and then the course of activity. And with that information, so when you present physicians with this sort of tool, they would be able to actually write scenarios if you basically have that pattern, valid scenarios, because physicians could write anything, but it wouldn't be valid at the end. But you want to sort of constrain them in this model of scenario. I find it difficult to actually build on other stuff, because the stuff is not really discoverable in a humanized way.
You're right in the sense that it may not be, what a model would think of as being a scenario. I accept that. It was really intended as a way of showing people how resources link together to tell the story. So if there's a better word for it, I'm certainly happy to think about what that word may be. I think people do understand at a loose level what scenario actually means, and so it seemed not unreasonable to use it. But I will agree with you. If you look at the, a strict definition of it, then yes, it's not exactly a scenario, but it kind of serves the purpose.
Okay, so when you log on to, you want to start creating a scenario in Clinify. So you create a new scenario, and then you've got this description field at the beginning, which is basically loose description field. But that would be where you want the structure, you want sort of the roles, the goals, and you would want to put them there in a sort of humanized way for a physician to be able to work with that. Don't you think it would be helpful?
I would certainly look at adding more stuff in there, absolutely. Remember that certainly as far as the tooling is concerned, the development of it is influenced by the people who are using it. Right at the moment, there aren't any sort of official modelers, if you want, using it, so therefore they haven't wanted this kind of stuff. If you do want to put that sort of thing in it, I'm very happy to add that. The one thing I always say to people, and I'm running a bit low on time, so happy to talk to you slightly off, but I've got 2 minutes. If you want to hang around, I'm happy to talk about it a little bit more. One thing I will say to people though is chat.fire.org. Okay, get onto there, and there is a Clinify stream, whack these things through, very happy to make additions. In the last 2 minutes, is there anything else that anybody wanted to cover off? Yeah.
This is seems to be a really neat way of expressing clinical models very close to the implementation language. But at the same time, it is close to the implementation language.
Yeah.
Have there been discussions of having a more standard representation that is not connected to specific implementation, like architect definition language, CME or things like that?
Yes. Short answer is there are a lot of discussions that are talking about those sorts of things. I'm not the best person to have them with. Graham is probably someone you might want to pick up on it. Or there's actually there's a chat, I'm trying to think which one it actually is. A chat stream that might be quite good for that. I can't think what it is. So, short answer, there are conversations. I'm not sure exactly where they've gone, and I'm not deeply involved in them, I must admit. But if you talk to Graham, or if you have a look at the chat, you'll see something there. Sorry, I can't be more explicit than that. Anything else? If not, thank you for coming. Hope you found it useful. Please feel free to use it online.